Well, I get to do all the really great stuff today other than sing with the choir. But it is now an absolute pleasure of mine to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Yolanda Watson Spiva. Dr. Watson Spiva currently serves as the president of Complete College America. CCA is a bold national advocate for dramatically increasing college completion rates and closing equity gaps by working with states, systems, institutions, and partners to scale highly effective structural reforms and promote policies that improve student success. CCA has become a national leader in the movement to dramatically increase the percentage of individuals earning a post-secondary credential. Dr. Watson Spiva is the former president and CEO of College Success Foundation, a national nonprofit college readiness, access, success, and scholarship organization headquartered in Bellevue, Washington. She also served as CEO, Executive Director of Project Grad in Atlanta, and Assistant Dean at Trinity College in Washington, D.C. She has held various positions with the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C. and in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Watson Spiva holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Spelman College, a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, and a PhD in higher education from Georgia State University. And we are deeply thankful to also have her as a board member of Campus Compact. Please join me in welcoming Yolanda to the stage.
Good afternoon. You don't sound very excited about your speaker. I'm really excited to be here today. This is an amazing assemblage, and let me just tell you, I am pumped by the choir, the chorus. I mean, first of all, the question about what happens when a woman takes power. I was like, oh, it's a big question, but I think we kind of know what happens when a woman takes power. Also, you know, the remix of I'm Every Woman, so I'm a Survivor, and I Will Survive. It was like it was amazing. So I'm excited on every level about being here. I also want to acknowledge, of course, thank you so much to Dr. Mary Grant. Thank you, Bobby Lauer. Thank you to all of the Campus Compact board members and all of the team members who are here. And I also want to thank all of you who are Campus Compact members. This really is a terrific opportunity for all of us to come together and engage and learn from one another and be inspired. So starting out in such an inspirational way is important that we are able to do that. So let me get myself organized. I have a little clicker here. I'm going to show you some slides. There we go. So, I've been respected and admired Campus Compact for many, many years. Of course, I serve as a board member, as has already been mentioned, but I've also worked on the board of Campus Compact in Washington State. As you heard, that I worked in Bellevue, Washington. And so having had the opportunity to, at the state level, but then at the national level, be engaged with Campus Compact is pretty important to me. And of course, Campus Compact and the organization that I lead, Complete College America, are also both lead partners in the Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement Coalition, which is actively working very hard to embed civic learning into the very fabric of higher education. I've also been very excited about the fact that Campus Compact, and with the group today in terms of the conference for Compact 25, I really feel like bringing everyone together to have the conversation, the important conversations, are really going to reinvigorate our commitment to supporting democracy and higher education, and really helping us to discover new ways to strengthen the coalitions that we have today, but also building new coalitions that can advance both of these critical American institutions. I'd like to start, therefore, by telling you a little bit about the organization that I have the privilege and honor to lead Complete College America and helping you to understand why our work synergizes with the work of Campus Compact and then with the broader work around democracy in higher education. So Complete College America, and we're known affectionately as CCA, is the organization that I've had the privilege to lead since 2018, but this organization was founded in 2009. And we, again, serve as a bold national advocate for dramatically increasing college completion rates, improving equity, and yes, I said the E word, and closing institutional performance gaps. We are built on 4 pillars of transformation: purpose, structure, momentum, and support. And we indeed envision a nation where all students, regardless of who they are, where they live, how much money they have or don't have, and whether their parents attended college or completed college, they all have an equal opportunity to gain access to higher education and complete a college degree or other credential of value. In our work, we found that what's key to increasing college completion rates is actually having lots of folks at the table. Post-secondary institutions, policymakers, and systems of higher education who are all working together to invest financially and otherwise in efforts that support an on-time completion. That's why CCA works in a coalition, much like you do at Campus Compact. We lead a nationwide alliance of 53 members, including states, institutions, college and university systems, and other partners who've all expressed and dedicated their commitment to promoting proven policies and evidence-based structural reforms that can help us to improve student success and reimagine post-secondary systems as engines of equity, prosperity, and hope. I know you've all seen these data, the Illuminate data, that show a steady upward movement in completion rates at the state and national levels. This positive trend is the result of the strategies that CCA has championed since our founding, as well as our alliance members and other partners across the ecosystem and other organizations who really have been a part of the college completion movement. But it's also the result of our fearless and undaunted spirit, along with our ongoing commitment to improving completion rates. This doesn't happen alone. And so here's something you all need to remember, and I know that you take this to heart as you do this work out in the field. College completion is a bipartisan goal. So as we hear about the divisions in higher education, one of the things that we know is that regardless of who's in the seat at the state legislature or at the in the federal level, a new administration just means that policies, priorities, and funding are going to change probably at some point yet again. But our growing alliance at CCA underscores a powerful truth. Despite the discord that permeates our national discourse, there is far more that unites us than actually divides us, and that's what we know out here in the field. Presidents and politicians, regardless of party, want more people in their states and across the nation to have high-quality credentials of value. The environment in which CCA works is always changing, just like it is for you all, but CCA and our alliance continue to grow and evolve to meet those new challenges. Likewise, higher education must continue to grow and evolve to meet new challenges as well. In November, CCA released a report entitled "Harnessing the Power of Higher Education to Renew American Democracy." The report explains how and why American higher education can and should promote civic and community engagement and democratic learning. Here's the premise of the report. The United States has 2 foundational institutions, democracy and higher education, that are both facing immense challenges, and their fates are intertwined. It's critical, therefore, that American colleges and universities continue to work to strengthen American democracy. The fulfillment of higher education's mandate to graduate men and women prepared for, able to participate in, as well as to contribute to the civic life of their communities and their nations is one of the promises that higher education actually made to this nation upon its founding. But to do this, our colleges and universities must prioritize civic engagement, community development, and democratic learning across the student experience, not just in an add-on elective course. CCA's new report makes the case that higher education is actually part of the problem with American democracy, but it also makes the case that higher education can be its salvation. As you know, American democracy is imperiled, and that's not what Yolanda said or CCA said. That's what data that we have globally has told us. We not only see it in our headlines and on our phones every day, but the rest of the world has also taken notice. The Democracy Index, published last month, continues to include the United States in the ranks of flawed democracies because of our political and structural issues. As you know, American higher education is also under tremendous stress. Recent gains in college attainment have been real and substantial, and we should applaud ourselves for that. But the data also continue to show persistent institutional performance gaps. And I want to pause on that terminology because we use that term institutional performance gaps as opposed to student attainment or achievement gaps because we put the onus on the institution as opposed to saying that the student is flawed in some particular way. And we think as institutions, we need to make the changes so that we can serve any and every student. So the data continue to show these persistent institutional performance gaps for students of color, for students from under-resourced communities, and older students. At the same time, not enough Americans in general are earning the post-secondary credentials that they need to get the jobs that will provide the economic mobility that they're seeking. A college degree is all but required, as we all know, to live comfortably in this country. But this near mandate to have a college degree or a credential of value, coupled with the increased inaffordability of college, has soured many Americans on higher education altogether. And that's where folks are losing confidence. The loss of confidence in higher education is troubling because the health of our nation's democracy relies in large measure on the robustness of our higher educational system. Studies have shown, and you know this again from your work with Campus Compact, that students who take part in community-based and civically engaged practices are more successful in college. That's just a fact. They gain practical problem-solving, communication, and teamwork skills that are highly valued in the workplace and are essential for sustaining our democratic processes. They leave college with a greater sense of civic purpose and responsibility, and research has also found that college graduates are more likely to vote and to volunteer. There's tremendous value in students going off campus, getting involved in the community, and learning how things actually work in the real world, not just within the theoretical confines of the classroom. So it's critical for citizenship and democracy. And yet, at the same time, many college students, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds and under-resourced communities, are really shut out of our modern knowledge economy and our modern democracy. That's because the post-secondary institutions they attend are structured to make it difficult for them to complete college. Much of American higher education consists of regional state universities and community colleges that must spread fewer resources among a larger population of students who require more support to succeed. And in our diagram here on the right are the regional publics and community colleges serving way more students than the privates and the elites. And while these open access institutions are besieged with unfunded mandates for reform, they're caught up in the demand to produce graduates for vocational fields such as education, healthcare, and business. Many of these same institutions struggle with low completion rates because their students cannot afford to attend full-time, and their students often lack access to courses and programs that build civic awareness and engagement. Higher education continues to be a path to the American dream, but college completion is still a path only open to some Americans and not all. We cannot, as leaders in this field, continue to allow this to be the case. Unequal opportunity actually weakens our nation's bedrock principles and hinders the promise of prosperity. So to restore public trust in higher education, which can increase participation in our democracy and improve civic culture, we must reframe higher education once again as a public good. It means building a higher education system that's more affordable so more students can attend college full-time. It means building a system where there are sufficient resources that are spent efficiently and effectively on classes, services, and proven programs that increase college completion, even if a student cannot attend full-time. It means building a system that imbues students with the skills, knowledge, and understanding that they need to be active, informed citizens who can make meaningful contributions to society. When institutions are committed to these public purposes of higher education, when civic engagement and community development are infused throughout the post-secondary educational curricula, when civic inquiry is integrated within students' career preparation paths, and when we're able to harness the energy and creativity of civic-minded educators and engage allies both inside and outside the academy, Then we can help to cultivate leaders who understand these deep connections between our economic futures and the health of our democracy. We can help colleges and universities lead the effort to restore public trust in higher education as a core democratic institution and value. When our post-secondary institutions visibly commit to preparing all, not some students, to be informed, engaged citizens, when this commitment is not an elective option, but instead is an expected course of action, they send a powerful message about their values and our democracy. When we commit to building the right system that works for all learners, higher education actually can be the solution for American democracy. The challenges facing American democracy and our system of higher education are actually two sides of the very same coin. The erosion of public trust, the widening of inequality, and the weakening of civic engagement, these are not separate problems, but instead tightly interconnected ones. We cannot hope to build a more just and equitable society that strengthens our democracy without first reckoning with the individual and collective failures of our colleges and universities. This is not just an educational crisis, but a democratic one. However, there is reason for hope. A growing movement of educators, advocates, leaders, and organizations such as Campus Compact are working to reimagine higher education as a force for civic renewal, social transformation, and the public good. By working to make civic engagement, community development, and democratic learning a central part of every student college experience, this movement is laying the groundwork for a more engaged and empowered citizenry. But this work cannot succeed in isolation. To truly transform higher education, we must also confront the deep inequities that pervade our system itself. It means investing in the public colleges and universities that have long been the engines of social mobility and economic opportunity in this country. It means ensuring that every student has access to the support and resources they need to thrive. And it means embracing a vision of education that is holistic, experiential, and grounded in the real-world challenges of our time. The future of our democracy depends on the strength and vitality of our colleges and universities. We need a higher education system, again, that's committed to the public good, full stop. We need institutions that are not just repositories of knowledge, but catalysts for social change. If we are willing to do the hard work of transformation, if we are willing to embrace a vision of education that is truly inclusive and empowering, then we can build a higher education system and a democracy that works for everyone. So let's embrace the opportunity and the mandate to create the higher education system that our students deserve. Thank you, and I look forward to a great conversation with you all today.
Great. Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you.
Can you all hear us all right? Good, thank you. Wow, a lot.
A lot.
A lot. And it's all easy, right?
Yes.
Very easy. Great. Okay, we're done here. We're good. So a couple of thoughts just in listening, and thank you for the report. Thank you for the leadership you're providing in this really important work and the points about coalition building. It's clear because we're only going to have success if we do this work together. So really appreciate underscoring that. One of the things that the paper talks about and CCA holds dear is that the fulfillment of higher ed's mandate and its promise to prepare graduates to participate and contribute to civic life of their own communities and the nation. Could you talk a little bit more about why that matters? And perhaps now, we're in this crisis. How do we elevate that work more? How do we prioritize it at institutions that are feeling stretched?
So in a number of ways, I would say, if we just look at where we are nationally, sometimes we get the outcomes that we get because of the fact that people are not as exposed or informed or enlightened on a number of topics, ideas, including history, including political science, including how our nation works, how our system of government works, and our system of governance. And so when we have people who are able to be captured into an echo chamber because they have not experienced at any time in their lives an understanding that is beyond their limited worldview, which could be within their home, within their community. And we know the data show us that prior to attending college or university or post-secondary education, most individuals live in a homogenous environment. And so they are not exposed to not only different people, but different ideas. And so unfortunately, when we get then to the point of folks being able to contribute to our national discourse by voting, whether it's in the ballot or voting with their feet, they're making choices that aren't necessarily as informed. And so if we are going to be a nation, again, that is able to compete on a global stage, who is able to generate new ideas, innovations, to really serve as a thought provocateur in a positive way, but also one that seeks to embrace globally around the world. We cannot do that with folks who only know what happens inside their home. They have to have a bigger and broader understanding. And we know that civic learning and engagement really helps to facilitate that for learners of all backgrounds and diversities. And so, again, we hear the language all the time about diversity being our strength. It really is. And a lot of times the first time people will have that ability to engage in that way is really in the post-secondary space. And so it's important that we not divorce what needs to happen in the classroom, what needs to happen in the field, and then how that plays out on the larger stage from what happens to our democracy, because those things are so inextricably linked. And so I think if we see this as a through line, it will make sense to anyone who is listening why we have to really recenter this in terms of what happens on college campuses.
Agreed. And thinking about, you mentioned teaching history, teaching civics, and we know that that's a challenge that happens, pre-college. It's
Yes.
happening at the K-12 level. So in partnership with our K-12 institutions, how can our students be working in partnership on those things to act as mentors in their own backyards with the next generation coming up?
Well, it's going to be difficult, especially when there is attack on not just truth, but also information that does not seek to perpetuate the lie, for all intents and purposes, that our American democracy has been a perfect democracy all along. And we've always been an ideal, striving to reach an ideal, not indicating that we are ideal. And so with that being the case, what's being taught even at the K through 12 level can be flawed, because now we're having an attack on books, on terminology, and on teachers, right? And so I think folks are afraid. I did hear today something heartening about someone who is unable to teach Black history any longer in their coursework, has decided to, on her own, create a Saturday school, if you will, at the public library and teach those courses instead, so students can come separately on Saturday. So people are finding creative ways, but I will say it's becoming increasingly difficult. And when a lot of the books that these teachers want to really utilize in order to make their points, those books are being banned. So I say all that to say it's important at the K through 12 level, but I think we have to be clear on what the challenges are and then develop workarounds or strategies for trying to figure out how to get the information to the students. If we create a set of learners at the K through 12, and then of course persisting past the post-secondary level, who are again told stories about what our nation has been, what it is, and even how it can potentially become its ideal self. If we're not told the truth about that, I fear we're going to lose a generation of individuals who could really help us shape this nation into what it can truly be in terms of a leader on the global stage again.
Yeah, and I find, in talking with the students on my campus, I ask them, where do you get your information from? Where do you go to, particularly as we're looking at the media also under assault and the media not trusted, and the places where, we have a whole bunch of students with us today, so maybe we can talk about that over the course of the next couple of days, but reliable sources of information are so important. So how do we begin to restore trust in some of those places when the noise against it is so loud?
Yeah, well, the biggest problem that we have, unfortunately, is the infusion of dollars in the systems and structures that are essentially creating the platforms for news, whether it's print media or electronic media. Of course, again, there's been a lot of chatter, and then it's become a cacophony, effectively, around the fact that saying distrust this source distrust this source. If that's being told to you all the time and you're hearing that, then you're likely to go to a TikTok to get your news because that's fun and friendly and seems safe, right? As opposed to going to some of the trusted news sources. And I'm not making a negative comment about TikTok. I'm just saying that that should not be your only place if you're getting information, right? So my point, though, is that the infusion of dollars into these systems where individuals and companies are buying up whole sections of local newspapers and then creating information chambers that effectively say one thing and don't provide real true information about what's happening locally and then what's happening nationally, that continues to be a problem. And so until we get the dollars out of some of these systems and structures, we have to really change some things politically and then from at the corporate level in terms of what's happening to make sure that we don't end up in a place where we could end up in an autocracy because of the fact that, or an oligarchy where a few folks hold the reins on all of the information that's being propagated in the world.
And also, I think working with our students to be critical consumers of information, ask good questions. I work with art students every day, and they are always, scrutinizing what's in front of them and thinking about the perspective. So it's really important, the critical thinking skills. And you mentioned that in your remarks, and you talked a little bit about it in the paper too, the report, which was great. And Yolanda, you referenced the pillars of transformation. Purpose, structure, momentum, and support all can be viewed through a civic learning lens. Could you talk a little bit more about that and share some strategies and ideas?
Yeah, so when we talk about purpose at CCA, we're saying that students should actually go to college on purpose, on mission, and with an agenda. Like they know why they're there, so they're not just sort of finding themselves or figuring themselves out. It gets too expensive of a proposition to go there with that level of dreaminess about the enterprise. And so students should go there on purpose. And so how does a student go to college on purpose? So that's the combination of what happens with college counselors, guidance counselors, college counselors at the secondary level, college advisors, and then what happens when a student is actually on campus, first year experience, and the advisors who really help them map out what their course of study should be based on what their life prospects or hopes and dreams are. And so really kind of melding what their talents, areas of impact that they want to make and where they're really passionate, and then connecting that with their purpose. And so when you do that, and they begin to have those explorations really as early as elementary, middle school, but then hone in on it at the secondary level, and then really begin to refine it, not perfect it, but refine it at the post-secondary level, I think it really helps the student to have a strong plan, and one that will lead to them going to college with momentum, the second pillar. And so momentum is really saying, the college experience or the post-secondary experience should not feel like you're in the 13th or 14th grade. It really should feel like a truly collegiate experience where there is this critical thinking that's at a higher level than what they may have engaged in at the secondary school, where they're able to explore, and whether there is a general ed curriculum, most of them will have, but whether it's a liberal arts institution or a community college or whatever it is, they have, again, exposure to a variety of ways of knowing and ways of thinking. And so then that momentum also makes sure that they're taking courses, they're placed in courses that will actually lead to a degree or a credential of value. So they're not taking non-credit bearing courses like remedial courses where these students are in these remedial courses that don't count toward credit and really utilize up a lot of their financial aid and then increases their time to degree. So that's the momentum piece. And then structure is making sure there are guardrails. So students, again, if they bump into a wall, it's sort of like it'll send them back to the middle of the lane where they're not getting run over over by the wall. If you were doing bumper cars, they kind of get back to the middle of the lane and they have some guardrails that keep them on track. So early warning indicators, things that will tell the faculty member or an advisor that a student is in trouble, and making sure they have clear pathways and also on-ramps and off-ramps, right? So if a student does decide to change majors, how do you implicate things like meta majors where students can major within a broad category, and if they change within that meta major, they're not losing lots of credits. Instead, they're still on their paths, right? And And then support. How do we make sure that structurally we embed things into not just the curriculum academically, but we make sure that financially, socially, and emotionally, these students are supported, that their basic needs are attended to, whether it relates to housing or childcare or adult care, and that these things are braided. So, we used to have this ideal that, what happens in the public square was different from what happens on the campus. And now we're having a more robust conversation, and I'm thankful that what we learned from history, but also the pandemic and other things, is that these things are not separate, right? These things are inextricably linked. So how do we braid resources such that what's available locally can also be connected to what's happening on campuses? And we're seeing the burgeoning of food pantries and housing vouchers being connected to students who are on campuses, and food vouchers and things of that nature. So that's where the support comes in. So for our 4 pillars of purpose, momentum, structure, and support, if you can just think about all of the things that you're already doing on campuses related to civic learning, helping students to get placements at nonprofits to understand how some of these things work. So the same systems that will provide a food pantry on campus, do they understand, does the learner on your campus understand how those resources, how funds get raised to provide those resources? What types of public systems are undergirded to help offer that through a nonprofit? Are they able to work and partner alongside members of their state or local legislators, if it's a commissioner or someone in the county seat, or if it's at the state level, to understand how laws get made locally, and then how they can advocate to get more resources, not just for their institutions, but also for those resources on the campus. So there's lots of ways that you can connect purpose, momentum, structure, and support to what's happening to make sure students are active and civically engaged, and that they're democratically present, little d, democratically present in terms of engagement.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that, because they're doing really, we say sometimes about our students, when they get in the real world, our students are in the real world.
Yes.
They're dealing with a lot of things. They're very smart. They are very driven. So I just think it's about what's the rest of the wraparound they need to be successful,
Yes.
both on campus and then when they step off of campus as well.
Yeah, and we really got to look at the campus no longer as having these boundaries or walls. We really need to make sure that it's a permeability, understanding, to your very point, that students are navigating multiple worlds as they're, sitting in our classrooms. They're already, many of them are parents. They're taking care of adults who may be aging, parents themselves who are maybe aging. They have multiple jobs. They're engaging civically. Some of them are holding office. I mean, they're doing lots of things. They're community servants. And so thinking about the various realities that our learners are navigating to even sit in the room in front of a faculty member and receive information, or in front of a Zoom screen if they're doing this online, they're navigating a lot. And so making sure that we understand the permeability between those realities and don't segment them as if they are siloed.
One of the things you mentioned, momentum and support and structure, and that I'm worried about, and I think we all are. I know you share it as well. Is that as we're looking at the rapidly changing federal climate, and the cutting in half the Department of Education, the impact that could have on program support mechanisms, the trickle down to states as states are looking at the need to backfill from a loss of federal dollars. At the very time this momentum is so important, the great possibility of a significant reduction in support, the one day the rules are one way, the next day they're another. What advice, recommendation do you have for the students who are in our midst to be, citizens in a democracy, for institutions? Because Lane made a really good point that I think that there's leadership happening in different places around this moment in time. It looks different depending upon community or institution, but how do we reconcile the momentum piece that's essential with the very real probability of a significant pulling back?
Yeah, so I would say that my advice is to first understand very clearly that history is the best teacher. This is not the first time these levels of retrenchment or rescission have occurred in our history. And so understanding that every generation has to fight for gains again and again and again. You cannot rely on what your grandparents did or what your parents did. It really is up to each successive generation to continue the fight forward, to make sure that those gains stay in place. I worked at the U.S. Department of Education in both of the Clinton administrations, and so having understood the possibilities and the great service that the federal government can provide. Also understanding, though, that there are places where cuts or or some programs are as effective as they need to be. I think a self-examination of our federal agencies, of our departments in our colleges and universities, all of that is actually healthy. I don't think that wholesale cutting in half of anything is a healthy way to respond. So I would also say that sometimes we want to make sure, and I'm not saying this would have precluded what's happening right now with DOGE, but I will say that sometimes we should be proactive to make sure that we're also creating the best effectiveness and efficiency in our programs ourselves so that someone else doesn't try to come in and do it. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but are we doing what we need to do to make sure that we're looking at programs to see, are they still meeting the needs? Are students graduating from our programs into high wage or high need or high impact even jobs where they can actually make a livable wage for them and their families? If we find programs where that's not the case, how do we set upon a course to either buttress those programs by getting real world people to serve on committees and help to fortify those programs, or if we make the difficult decision down the road to get rid of those programs, then we have data that informs those programs, program eliminations. So I would also say that our ability to be thoughtful, to be proactive, our ability to use history as a teacher and understand that we could have to continue to fight for hard-fought gains again and again and again, and then also to continue to be hopeful, because it's also easy during a time like now where it feels like our sector is under attack, and it doesn't just feel like it, we are literally under attack, to become hopeless. And I think that, seeing all of you here, that's what I mentioned earlier about being excited, because it is difficult to even muster up the resources, the time to be away from your families when you may be in a home that has, mixed status individuals in the home, and you don't know while you're here at this conference if someone's going to be snatched up at home. This is a sacrifice to even be here. So when I think about what it means to even show up and be present in the world today, to have children who, you may have a child on a college campus, or you yourself may be a learner on a campus and trying to figure out, is the Pell Grant going away? Is my scholarship going away? Is my job offer going away? So many law students have had their placements for associate roles being rescinded especially from the federal government, like the Justice Department. So having things that actually impact your ability to live and thrive and survive and create the life for yourself, that creates a level of fear. But I also think that's a part of the purpose of this chaos. And so I think if we can somewhat segment the chaos from the fray and continue to be thoughtful. And that's why also, in terms of us, we have to make sure we're operating on purpose and on mission, that we continue to have momentum within ourselves, and that we operate within the structures that are already, prescribed by our nation and by our governments, et cetera, but that we also give one another support. So our purpose, momentum, structure, and support is not just a CCA ideal. I think it could be adopted writ large.
We can adapt that for building coalitions.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think you're right. It's about trying to, shake off fear when it's very real. Fear is just not coming out of the other things that are happening. And so really building those trusting partnerships, those coalitions, to do the deep work, to have the honest conversations, to look at who your partners are and keeping the momentum going forward, and to center our students at the heart of this work, and then by extension the communities that we're privileged to do this work in, I think is really important. And it energizes the field.
Yeah, I think that continuing to realize that we're always going to be better doing this work together, seeking out partners, and not just the usual suspects, right? It's great to have long-standing partnerships and to continue to make sure that those work, but also think about who's the out-of-the-box group or organizer or group of individuals that haven't necessarily been at the table. Who do we need to bring to the table in order to improve our enterprise? And so, again, systems are designed to get the outcomes that they get. And so thinking about how, most of us are operating when we work on campuses, systems that were developed hundreds of years ago in many cases, or at least half a century ago in some cases. And so thinking about then, how do we bring bring new energy, new determination, new verve, and new vigor to the enterprise. And a lot of that comes from new partnerships and new coalitions. So I think thinking outside of the box about how we get this work done and bringing those folks to the campus, a lot of the distrust and mistrust and declining sentiment about colleges and universities happens because people have no idea what's happening behind those gilded gates, right? And so making sure that, again, we increase the permeability between community and the campus. So not just in community colleges have been doing this for so long, but making sure this happens across all institutional types where people feel welcomed on those campuses, they feel connected to what's happening there, they understand what's happening in those classrooms, and they understand the product that's being produced, which are graduates who can actually go out into the communities and serve. And so when that happens, you don't get this competition also, because we are also seeing lots of ghost markets popping up trying to actually do what we already do so well. And so I think I heard someone say earlier about telling our story and telling it better about what we're actually accomplishing on these campuses, the folks that we're producing, what they're doing out in the world. And then I also heard one of the award recipients talking about the fact that people really, when you ask them about their local college or university, they're all gung-ho. That's true. The data has borne that out. And so how do you get that excitement to really become infectious and contagious so that then, spreads not just, it extrapolates from the local community all the way across the state and then across the nation so that people get excited about college again. So I think, we also haven't touched on this, but I'll just say quickly about the return on the investment, because we talked about the sacrifice, not just in terms of time, but also dollars. If students aren't able to earn something dollar-wise that allows them to feed their families and survive and not have to work 3, 4, and 5 jobs and drive an Uber at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's worth it. And so we have to continue to find ways to explore, and that's where I also think partnerships are going to be very important, and especially with industry, to make sure that we're making those connections early and often, because again, I think we do that too late if we wait till second semester of senior year.
Well, and I think it's also in the civic learning space, the civic engagement space, it's a translation too.
Yes.
Because the skills that students are acquiring doing this work are really high impact, powerful skills of engagement, of looking and building bridges, of supporting people who are different from them, of opening up their minds, of rolling up their sleeves, of working in teams. Those are not soft skills. Yeah. Those are essential skills. And so I think being able to point to those as well, because that will set our students up for success no matter what they're doing when they leave our institutions.
And helping students learn how to articulate that as a part of what they've earned and yielded from the experience of being on a college campus in the post-secondary educational space. Unfortunately, many of our learners now, when they graduate, they can talk extensively about their degree and their cognate area. So they can tell you about economics and what it means to have earned a bachelor's degree in economics, for example. But they cannot tell you how that applies in the real world and what that actually means. And some of them, then that's what leads to confusion about, well, what's my next step? Because they haven't necessarily been advised or engaged in civic learning and experiential learning that helps them understand, oh, that economics doesn't just look like, diminishing marginal returns drawn on a graph. It actually looks like this in the real world. And there's various ways that I can apply what I've learned. So I think making that translation is going to be pretty important as we continue to think outside of the box for how we engage students civically and with civic learning and democracy as well.
Well, and I think making sure that we're working really hard to push beyond the narrative, the hostile narrative presently around institutions are not for everybody and they have to be for everybody. We will lose ground as a democracy, as a country, as a people, if we do not ensure that the very individuals who are receiving the messages that maybe a college education isn't for you are the ones that get left behind. So we have to really double down on access, on inclusion, on making sure that we're creating equal opportunities for everyone to see that higher ed, no matter what path, whether it's a 4-year or 2-year certificate, is for them. We have to.
It's funny, I always say that the people who say that are always college educated and so are their kids, right? That's the funny part about that they're the ones saying it. And I say, unfortunately, we had the Varsity Blues scandal where people paid all this money. If a college education wasn't that valuable, people would not have paid millions of dollars and risked their freedom to put their children in those schools. So we know it's worth something. It's like the best kept secret. So the thing is, that's why we want to make sure everybody has access to not just attend college, but to persist and complete.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you, Yolanda, for your leadership, for the work that you've done across the country, for the work of CCA. And I want to thank all of you who are here today for the work that you're doing to make sure that we are hanging on, we are building bridges, and we are leading forward in these very challenging times. So thank you so much.